You can start off.
Thank you. Brilliant. So my name's Oliver Boult. I'm a senior consultant at Simpsons, but today I'm coming to talk to you about Power BI requirement gathering and using storyboarding and wireframing to do that. What we're going to discuss, what we're going to go through, well, first we're going to introduce what storyboarding and wireframing is, and then we're going to look at, well, what do we want to get out of the sessions? What do we want to know? And problems that we've found in the past and issues that we've experienced around just asking these questions straight out and how we're going to resolve them. And then also how we're going to gather this information, how are we going to get the information that we would like to know. And then finally, we're going to look at how we transfer this into a wireframe. How are we going to look at putting these notes, these requirements into a visual of what our Power BI report is going to look at. And then right at the end, we've got a section for question and answers. Brilliant. So what is storyboarding and wireframing? To start with, what is storyboarding? If you Google, the definition's quite a standard one: the process of producing a visual portrayal of a narrative, concept or script divided into separate slides or panels. For us, we're trying to produce a visual portrayal of how a user uses Power BI, how they navigate through the report. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to use a flow chart. We'll go into more detail about how we'll format this and create this, but that's how we're going to do our storyboarding. And then for wireframing, again, with a little Google, the definition we get is the process of producing a visual representation of web pages, apps, or an interactive product. Now, for us, the interactive product is a Power BI report, and we're going to produce a visual representation of that Power BI report. One thing to note is our wireframe is not going to contain any data. It's not going to have any sort of live Power BI features in it. It simply is just a visual representation of that Power BI report. So what do we want to know? When I started building Power BI reports, I used to sit down with the customer or the colleague that I was building the Power BI report for, and we'd sit down and I'd ask some questions, and I found myself asking the same questions, wanting to know the same type of things, really. The first question that I used to ask is, what data would you like to see on the report? So typically, we want to know what data is going on to that report, whether it's the KPIs, the measures, the graphs, what data is going in what graphs. We want to know a little bit about that data. Question number two typically would follow on from that and say, how would you like to see this data on the report? Which visuals would you like to use? So the first thing I'd want to know is, what are we showing? The second thing I want to know is, how are we showing it? And then the third question that typically used to come up was, how do you want to separate the pages within the report? And more generally, how are we going to navigate through the report? So we've got, our first question is, what data would you like to see? Second one is, how are you going to see it? Third one, how are we going to navigate through this? So these are the questions that I want to know. And me being quite naive to start with, I used to ask all three of them questions as they are on the screen there. So I was expecting to be able to ask all of them and get quite straightforward answers. So I'd ask, what data would you like to see on your report? And I was expecting this answer. I was expecting just like this. They'd tell me exactly the KPIs. They'd tell me exactly the measures that I want to see. They'd even draw me a nice little picture like they have there to show me exactly how it's going to be laid out in the report as well. But unfortunately, this question is quite a broad question. It's an open-ended question. And I very rarely sort of fit into that green category in the middle of our scale there. And instead, I'd find myself getting answers that sat on either side of that. So the first one being, I don't know.
Very good decision.
Thank you. The first one being, I don't know. this seems like a silly response. We've been asked to build a Power BI report. We ask, what do you want to see on it? And the answer is, I don't know. But the reason for this could be, there could be various different reasons for this. It might be an end user that's not familiar with Power BI or the data. They know exactly what they want to get out of the report, but they don't necessarily know the underlying data, and therefore doesn't want to step out of their comfort zone and admit, I know nothing about the data. So they give the answer, I don't know. Likewise, it might be a back-end developer that knows the data inside out and back to front, but again doesn't know Power BI or possibly doesn't know what the end users are using. So again, instead of stepping outside of that comfort zone, they're going to give us the answer, I don't know. So that's our first issue. That's our first group of people that unfortunately aren't giving us the information we want to find. The second group is, I want everything. And this is very, very common. I want everything. And not only do I want to see everything, I want to see everything from forever, and I want to see it on that first page. So this feels like it might be a better situation than the first one, somebody that's not given us any information. But actually, this situation, this scenario, we find ourselves trying to cram information on a page, and then we end up building a Power BI report that is simply just unusable, and users are just going to reject the report and not want to use of the amount of information on it. So what are we going to do to solve this issue? Well, the first thing we're going to do, as you can see in that big cross, is that we're going to remove this question, what data would you like to see on the report? We're not going to ask that question. Instead, we're going to move away from asking data-related questions and move towards business-related questions. We'll go into a little more detail about what that means later on, but that's our main target for this. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to investigate further once we have an answer, asking what the purpose is and use for the information. So we've got our little bit of information from them, we're digging deeper and finding more and more and more out. So that leads on to the third thing that we're going to do, which is we're going to ask for more information when a response is subjective. When doing Power BI requirement gathering, the amount of times that we hear things like, oh, I want to see when this KPI is good, or when we're not doing too well in this department. Well, what does good mean? What does not so well look like? And then we can dig out some more information from that. So that's our first question that we've highlighted. We want to know the issues with it, and then what our sort of resolutions are going to be. Second question. How would you like to see the data on the report? Which visuals would you like to use? And this actually has the same issue with question one. It's too open-ended. We're asking to choose from hundreds of visuals, and the answers that we're getting are just not direct enough. And the reason the consequence of this is that we could end up with illegible graphs, because a suggestion of a line chart or a bar chart that doesn't really match the data. So people know that bar charts and line charts are often quite good graphs. They are often quite useful, but if they don't match the data, they can cause a bit of a headache, as you can see on them ones. The second issue we get with this is that it opens the sort of selection up to poor visual choices. So again, you can see there we've got a tree map, a pie chart, and a ribbon chart, which in certain situations could be a very valid choice, but often they can be quite difficult to use and quite difficult to get information out of. And then thirdly, aquariums. Because we've opened that question up so widely, we can literally get any answer. And I know that's a bit of tongue-in-cheek. We don't usually get aquariums as a requirement, but it just highlights how silly the answers could be, because we've opened that question up as wide as it possibly can be. So what are we going to do to solve this? Well, again, you'll see a theme coming on. we're not going to ask that question. We're not going to ask which visuals would you like to use. Instead, we're going to focus the questions on visuals that we know will produce easy to use and easy to read Power BI reports. So jumping back to our line graphs and bar charts, if we know that certain visuals will work well, we'll start focusing questions on them visuals as opposed to just allowing the customer or the colleague to ask whatever it might be that answer any visual that they might be thinking of. The second point, we're going to offer choices from a selection of visuals that allow best practice for the customer to use from. So again, we are almost creating stock items or stock visuals that they can select from, knowing full well that whichever one they pick, it is still going to create a visual and a report that is easy to read and easy to use, and will create a Power BI report that people actually want to use. And then our third question that we want to find out, our first third part of information that we need to gather is, how do you want to separate the pages within the report? How do you navigate through this report? Now, for me, as soon as I see the word separate, I start thinking filter, split, slice, divide. They're the kind of words that I'm thinking of when I see that word separate. And then as soon as I'm thinking of filtering, splitting, dividing, or slicing data, my mind is simply going to dimensions. I'm thinking, I can split the page by maybe dimension value. So I can split it by store, I can split it by maybe employee, things like that. And although at the start, if you've got 1 or 2 stores, that might be perfect. It might work quite well. Every time that we add a new store, every time that we have a new employee, this report is going to slowly grow and grow and grow. And it constantly needs updating. So this question is actually, it's our fault, it's my fault for asking this question. Sorry, was there a question there? No, not a problem. We'll just carry on. So it's my fault for asking this question. How do you want to separate the report? We're leading the customer down paths that we don't necessarily want to go down. So how are we going to resolve this? Well, again, we're going to we're not going to ask that question. We're not going to ask how they want to separate the report. We're not even going to ask how they want to navigate through the report. And instead, we're going to use the storyboarding section that we're going to run through in a minute to almost determine how a user should navigate through the report. And that'll become quite clear when we go through that in a second. But at this point, we are going to decide how a user should navigate through the report from what we found out from the storyboarding. So we've got our information that we want to find out. We know that we want to know what data is going on the report. We want to know how we were going to show this visually. And then finally, we also want to know how we're going to navigate through the report. But how do we gather this information? And the title of this presentation probably spoils this question. We're going to use storyboarding and we're going to use wireframing. But how do we do that? How do we do storyboarding? And we need 2 tools for this. We need a whiteboarding tool for the storyboarding side, the side that we're going to create the flowchart. And then we also need a design tool to create that wireframe, the mock of the Power BI report. Now, as you can see there, there's various different tools you could use to create the whiteboarding and the design, the wireframe. But I'm going to use Figma, and the reason for that is that Figma does both of these things in one. We've got FigJam, which is our whiteboarding sort of section of Figma, allows us to pull post-it notes onto a page that you'll be able to see in a second. And then also Figma Design that allows us to use wireframing and design a mock Power BI report. So like I said, there's various different tools, but Figma's the one that we're going to run through and use today. So we've created a little bit of an example here, a little bit of a mock requirement gathering session. And who is our end user? Who is the person we're sort of contacting with? It is an end user, and that second point there, no experience in data. This is a vital point for us to sort of highlight at this stage. So this person knows nothing about Power BI. This person knows nothing about data warehousing, dimensions, facts, KPIs, measures. They know nothing about them. They are simply an end user, and they're a keen cyclist that would like to use their Garmin and Strava data to find out more using Power BI. So they know quite a lot about cycling. They know that they can get data out of their cycling apps, but they don't know how Power BI works, how data is modeled in general. So we're going to have to get this information out of them without using data specific terms. So how do we start this? How do we get the ball rolling with this session? And you can see at the bottom there, we will start the session with a high level question looking to get the most important KPIs to the user and move forward from there. So high level question, you can see here, I've asked, what are you most interested in using this report for? So that is a very, very high level question. We've not gone into any specifics about data, but it is business related. What are you going to use this report for? What are you most interested in? And they've very kindly given us quite a vague and not very helpful answer to look at my cycling data. Now, other than finding out that the data is going to be cycling related, this is not really giving us any information. But what we're going to do is we're going to stick with this approach. We're going to stick with the method that we're doing here, and we're just going to rephrase that high level question again. We're essentially fishing for an answer that will allow us to run and dig deeper. But until then, we're going to keep asking them high level questions. So by rephrasing that question to how would you like this Power BI report to help you, it's pretty much the same question as question one. But this time they've given us a slightly different answer. They've told us, I want to use this report to help me become a better cyclist. So again, still very vague. There's not much there that's going to tell us how the report's going to look or even which KPIs to use, but we know what they want to use the report for. They want to use it to become a better cyclist. So that's our output, our end goal is the report to be used to become a better cyclist. And now we're going to sort of run with this. We've got our little catch, and we're going to run and extrapolate this and get some more information. So investigating further, you'll remember our second point on that first question that says investigate further, getting more information on subjective comments. So what is the main way you measure a performance as a cyclist? How do you know if you're getting better? So we're asking more questions about their response. I know nothing about cycling, but their response is my VO2 max during a ride and my functional threshold power. So it means nothing to me, but what I do know is they're two KPIs. So just from this simple conversation, starting from the high level and going down, me knowing nothing about cycling and the end user knowing nothing about Power BI or KPIs or data in general have been able to grab our first two KPIs. What are we looking for to show on this report? So we've got our first two KPIs, but we're not going to stop there. We want to dig deeper and find more information out. So again, like I said, I don't know about FTP or VO2 max. So I want to know, are we looking to increase these or decrease these? They've very kindly told us that we're trying to increase both of them. So how do we show this on a storyboard on our flow chart? Well, what we'll do is we'll put two post-it notes, one for each KPI. So what is my VO2 max and what is my FTP. So these are the two things that we're wanting to find out. They're our two KPIs, and therefore we're popping them as our two post-it notes. So moving on, we're going to dig further. We're going to ask more information, what they want to know about the VO2 max and FTP. So our first question is, well, how do you measure that? How do you determine your current level VO2 max and FTP? And then we're sort of guiding them down the answer, or at least giving them suggestions. So is it from your last ride? Is it an average over a time frame? So because they know they're not experienced in data or anything like that, we want to give them suggestions. We want to help them get the answer that they want. So they very kindly told us that it's an average over the last month. We're not going to stop there though. We're continuing to asking and quantifying them subjective subjects. How do you want to know? How do you know if your VO2 max and FTP are good or bad? Well, they compare them to my target and last year. So again, we're sort of at no point have we really mentioned data at all. We're asking them business related, or in this case, cycling related questions, just to get that information out of them. And again, the term last year is quite subjective. It could mean various different things. It could be the last 12 months. It could be the same month last year. It could be the last calendar year. So there's various different things that last year could mean. So we want to clarify that up. And they've very kindly told us that it's the same month last year that they're comparing to. So not only now have we got our two KPIs, but actually we've got comparisons for our KPIs. We now can tell whether our KPIs are doing well or if they're doing bad. And then we just want to find out about them comparisons. So again, you can compare in various different ways. You can compare an actual value, percentage, percentage growth, things like that. So how do we want to compare them? And they're very kindly, it's as if I've made this example up myself, given us the answer that we want, which is percentage difference. So what we can do is jump back to our storyboarding, jump back to our flow chart, and we can start putting that information under what is my VO2 max. We can tell how we're calculating that. So that top line, average VO2 max per ride over the last month. And then also what we're comparing that to. So we're comparing it to the target and we're comparing it to the same month last year and their percentage differences. So you can see here we're fleshing out that storyboard. We're putting the information that we want to see, how we calculate it, and how do we know whether it's going well or not. So we're getting that information out and building on it. So what I'll do, I won't show you the conversation each and every time. Instead, I'll sort of narrate that, but show you what we're asking next, how we're moving on from this next point. So we've got our VO2 max, how we calculate it and what we're comparing it to. Now we want to know what questions are they asking of that. So if they notice that there is a drop in VO2 max or there is an increase in VO2 max, what is the next thing you want to know? So we've done that by adding just a little arrow and what the consequence is. So a drop in VO2 max, what's the next thing we're asking? Likewise, a drop in FTP, what's the next thing we're asking? So this is a bit of a jump, but the conversation is what is the next thing you want to know if you noticed a drop in your VO2 max? And the end user, the customers very kindly told us, well, they want to know about their HIIT rides, so their high intensity interval training rides, because that affects the VO2 max. And we're going down the same process again and again and again. So we're asking, right, what what is it about them high intensity rides that you want to find out? Is it the number? Is it the proportion? Bits like that. So again, they've told us actually they want to find out both. How are you wanting to see that? Or you want to see it month by month, or you want to see it week by week? Is it just a total number for the last month? And again, they're telling us actually they want to be able to see it month by month and also week by week. And you can see there for the last 2 bullet points, they've told us, right, it's the number of rides that are hit and the proportion of rides that are hit as well. So they're telling us what they want to see and getting that information out of them without actually asking any data related questions whatsoever. Likewise for the FTP, so we've said you've noticed a drop in the FTP. What's your next questions? What are the things that you're asking next? Well, there are certain rides that are called FTP tests. We want to know how many of them have been done. And again, we're digging down on that information. So we're asking, is it the number of rides? Is it the proportion? They want to see both. How do you want to see it? Do you want to see it as a total number? Do you want to see it month by month comparison? Or do you want to see it week by week? And again, they've told us they want to see it month by month and also week by week. So we're getting that information out of them by asking, what's your next question? What's your next thought? If this is the case, what do you want to know next? And we're starting to build out this flow chart. And what you'll notice is we're actually finding out the almost the path through the Power BI report that user's intending to take. So the first thing is they want to see them values, and then if them values are not what they were expecting, this is where they go next. So we're plotting out that navigation. You'll find that that's quite repetitive, because the next thing we're going to do is say, brilliant. So we've found out that this is the proportion of hit rides or FTP rides. This is the number. What do you want to know if they've dropped? Well, if they've dropped, if the proportion of hit rides have dropped or the number of hit rides have dropped, the action there is to simply go and increase the number of hit rides completed so that they can improve their VO2 max. Likewise, for the FTP tests, if they've dropped, they want to increase them so that they can increase their FTP. What you'll notice here is that the things that are within the report we've kept in blue boxes, but we've got 4 actions there that are in green circles. What we want to do is be able to show how the user, how the Power BI user is using that report and what are they gaining out of it. So if at any point they get to a point where they are then taking an action outside of the Power BI report, we're going to put that as a green circle. So you can see here, they've gone, check the number of VO2 max, it's dropped. They've had a look at their hit rides, it's dropped. They're going to take an action. They're going to leave the Power BI report, and this is the action that they're going to take. So you'll be able to see from the flow chart where the user's going and then what the result is. So we've noticed there's a drop and the actions are there, but what if actually the number of hit rides hasn't dropped, or if the number of FTP rides haven't dropped? What is it that they'd like to find out? And again, we've done this by arrows, and actually they want to find out the same things regardless of if hit training's dropped or FTP's training's dropped, and that is what the proportion of the ride is spent in each of the 7 power zones and also each of the 7 heart rate zones. So like I said before, I know nothing about cycling, so I'm going to have to dig a little deeper about what this means. What are the 7 power zones? What are the 7 heart rate zones? And how are we measuring that? So that's my first question. How are we calculating the proportion of each ride spent in each power zone? Is it the time? So is it measured in minutes and things like that, or are we wanting the proportion of the ride? Well, they've told us the proportion of the ride. Is that an aggregation over time, or are we finding an average? How do we want to calculate that? And again, they've told us it's an average. Do you want to see it by month or by week, or as a one-off figure? Again, they've told us month by month and also week by week. So we're asking the same questions over and over. We've gone from that high-level question, and we're digging down the information, but also repeating the questions. What if we see a drop? What if we see a rise? And this is the next thing that they want to find out. So naturally, what we're going to do is say, well, what is it that you're looking for within these graphs, within the 7 power zones, and what happens if that drops, or what happens if that increases? So they've told us that if they see a drop in proportion of the ride in zone 5 and 6, then they need to do this action. Likewise, in zone 3, they need to do this action. So you can see here how we're progressing this flow chart. We're asking more questions, and then we're asking what next? What happens if there's a drop? What happens if there's an increase? And this is the action that they take. For that last point, we asked, well, what happens if it increases? And they said, well, we're happy with that. We don't need to take an action. We're happy just to sort of see that on a graph. So we're constantly asking what next. As you can see there, we've sort of come to the natural end of that cycle. We've started at that high level, and we've worked all the way down to a point where there is always an action, regardless of where it gets to. So what are we going to do next? We've done our first 2 KPIs. What do we want to find out next? And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to return back to that high level question. So they've only given us 2 KPIs, so we're probably going to find out a little bit more information around other KPIs that they want to find out. So what we can ask is, other than your VO2 max and FTP, is there any other way that you can determine whether you're becoming a better cyclist? So we're returning back to that high level question, and they've very kindly again told us the answer is it's around endurance, becoming a better endurance rider. So we're asking, well, how do you measure becoming a better endurance rider? And they've told us that it's their average speed on an endurance ride, their average distance on an endurance ride, and their average power on the endurance ride. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to do exactly the same thing again. We're going to split them out, put them onto post-it notes, and we want to find out how do they measure it and how do they compare it. So again, we're going down the same path and asking, starting with the power, your power during an endurance ride, is it the last ride? Is it an average over a certain time frame? They've told us it's the average power per endurance ride over the last month. How do you know if you're doing well or not against that? It's versus the target, and it's versus same month last year. Is that a percentage difference or actual? They've told us that it's percentage difference. So you'll notice that we're asking the same questions over and over and over again, but we just need to make sure that we're doing that to get the information out of the customer, out of the colleague, whoever we're building the report for. So again, we've got our high level figures. What do we want to know? Well, we want to know if there's a drop or an increase. What do you want to find out? And this time, the end users actually told us, well, regardless of whether the power, distance and speed increases or decreases, they want to see that over the last 6 months as well as a one-off figure. So we're going to put there, what's our last 6 months value? How do we want to see it? We want to see the average power per endurance ride. Do you want it compared to anything? We want it compared to the target. Do you want to see it per month, per week? How do we want to see it? We want to see it both per month and then also drill down to per week. So then asking the same questions again, we can ask what happened if there's a drop. Well, for the distance, if there's a drop in the distance, the action is simply to increase the distance of each endurance ride cycle for further and build that up. If there's a drop in power or speed, then we're looking at slightly different things. So the power, if there's a drop in it, we want to see, well, what proportion of of the ride is spent in each of the power zones. Again, asking what that means. How do we know if it's good? How do we know if it's bad? And what if there's a drop? And again, they've told us, well, if there's a drop in zone 3, then we've got an action. Likewise, down at the bottom, we've got a slightly different thing and a new thing, which is our average cadence per endurance ride. We want to ask that question again. So how do we calculate the cadence? Is it an average per ride? Is it a total? And they've told us it's an average per endurance ride. What's the target for this? Well, this is actually a static target, which is 90. We want to keep it at 90. So the action there is if it's bigger or less than 90, the action is to work to get that cadence to 90. So you can see here again, we're asking the same questions over and over, and we're building that flow chart to get an action out of it. So at the end, this is what we end up with. We end up with a flow chart that will show us a high level question, almost like a summary figure, and then we're going down and digging into the details. It shows us how we navigate through this report as well, and what the next question is. What's the next thing we want to find out? So we've got that on our page, and at this point, it's starting to look a little bit like a storyboard. We've got the visual portrayal of the navigation through a Power BI report. So it's starting to look like that. But what do we do next? Well, the next thing we want to do is transfer this to a wireframe. So how do we transfer this to a wireframe? So we've got the information. At the minute, we've probably solved question 1 and question 3. We know what data is going to go on the report, and we also know how we're going to navigate through the report, or at least we know what the next stop is. So we want to complete question 3 and also answer question 2, which is how do we visualize this? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to re-go through or re-travel the flow chart, but this time we're going to start putting suggestions of which visuals we think would work well for that visual, for that piece of data. This is usually done away from the customer. It helps us go back and suggest different items that we could use, but it could also be in conversation with the customer or the end user. For this example, because the end user is quite novice to data, we're probably going to do this away, and then when we go back, we can make some suggestions that will help create a report that we want to do. So you notice starting at the left, what is my VO2 max? Well, how do we want to show this? I think this has actually looked quite good as a card with a bit of dynamic text to show the comparison. So we're going to show the average VO2 max over the last month as a card value, and then we're going to show it versus target and same month last year as dynamic text. And then moving across, how do we want to show the proportion and the number of rides over the last 6 months? Again, we're going to make a recommendation. So I'm thinking maybe a column chart with a line. So the column showing the number, the line showing the proportion of each ride. And then finally moving across to our 7 power zones, because we're showing proportion, we're going to use 100% stacked bar chart. So we're not actually interested in the height of the bar chart. Instead, we're interested in what proportion for each month. So we've gone through this flow chart again and added our recommendations for the visuals. And then moving on, what we do is, you'll notice at the bottom there, we've done it again for that second sort of flow chart. But what we want to do now is determine, well, how are we going to put these onto pages? And luckily for us, this naturally sort of splits into 2. We've got our performance analysis, we've got our VO2 max and FTP at the top, and then our endurance analysis. So we've been quite fortunate there that there is a clear separation. But this is at the point where we're looking at that and deciding what page or what information would work well on what page. What you probably struggle to see, but because of the size, but here in the center, we've got an arrow navigating from the first page to the second page, and what that's showing is we've actually got a card visual here that has a summary of this report, and it's saying use a bookmark or a button to navigate to this second page. So we're already thinking of how we're going to navigate from that first page to that second page. We've just got a card visual that will take you to the second page when you click on it as well. So at this point, I think it's fair to say that we've definitely thought about what data is going to go on the report. We've definitely thought how we're going to navigate through the report, but we've not really fleshed out that visual side. What is it going to look like? How do you want to visualize the data? We've made recommendations, but what we're going to do is we're going to start actually putting them visuals onto a page and sort of wireframing this report. So the first thing to do is to create a background. I often use Inkscape. It's a personal preference for the tool, but obviously you could use PowerPoint. There's lots of different tools that you can use to create backgrounds. You can also do it within Figma as well. So we've created a background in Figma. It's quite a plain background. And then the next thing that I'm doing is just putting blocks where I think the visuals will probably sit. If you remember back, we've got the VO2 max that we want to find out, the FTP, and then the rest of the endurance values. And then we've also got values that are related to the proportion and the number of rides, and then also our power zone and our heart rate zones. So I'm automatically thinking we've probably got 3 sets of cards, and then we've got a section for our proportion and number of rides, and a section for our heart rate zones and our power zones. So I'm already planning where on the page this information is going to go, and we're using just basic report theory, which is the most important, goes into the top left, and we sort of work left to right along the top, and then again along the bottom. So we're building out these sections and finding where on the page would be best to put this information. And then this is where my personal favorite part comes in. We jump over to Figma and we start building the report in front of the customer, or building the wireframe, should I say, in front of the customer. So if I jump over to Figma, you'll see here I've got my background, I've got my sections that I've created, and what I've done is I've created some components, some assets. For people that have used Figma before, you might be familiar with these components that we can just drag onto a page. For those that aren't, these are just standard set visuals that I've pre-created, so that I can just drag them, drop them onto a page, and it will represent what the visual will look like. The quite interesting thing with this, so if I pull on our line and bar chart that I suggested for our for proportion and number of rides, if I just make that a little bit smaller and pop that into our first visual, our first section there, and what you'll see on the right hand side is we can edit this to whether it's a clustered or a bar chart, whether we want the legend on as well. So it's quite good at being able to talk through with the customer exactly what they want as we're building this in front of them. And likewise, we can edit certain bits. So if here we're going to say this is the months of the year. There we go. And then also we want to see number of rides. So we can start building that in front of them. And the beauty of this is that we've sort of made our suggestions beforehand. We're going to have our flow chart next to us while we're doing this. But we can start offering different options to the customer, to the end user, while we're building it in front of them. And this way they're starting to see exactly how it's going to look as we go through this. Obviously, this session can take quite a while, and we'll drag different things in and change different bits. But if I jump back to my PowerPoint and show you what we're hoping to achieve, this is our end goal. So hopefully we can then create a visual that looks something similar to this, where we have our visuals, how they're going to look, how they're going to be set out, and how they are represented onto the page. You'll notice we've got a bit of conditional formatting on there. So it helps me going forwards, knowing exactly what I need to do in Power BI to create this, but it also manages the expectation of the customer. Hopefully, once I've finished the Power BI report, they'll get exactly this, and they'll be able to say, yep, that's exactly what I wanted, because we saw this a little time ago during our wireframing. So that is how we pull the storyboarding through to wireframing, and hopefully we can end up with something like that. Are there any questions or suggestions that people would like to make?